Welcome back to another episode of Startups Are the Rest of Us. I'm your host, Rob Walling, and in this episode, I'm going to walk through a few listener questions and a few listener comments. We got a couple really helpful and insightful comments about lifetime pricing, selling a one-time deal. That was a few episodes back, and we heard from none other than Baer, who I had mentioned in that episode, and he gave me more info on X Twitter. Actually, you can go read that thread if you are interested. We will link it up, as well as someone else weighed in, and then there are a handful of other listener questions that I'm going to be attacking today. Before we dive into today's episode, if you're a founder doing more than $1 million in ARR, you've probably hit a decision that really matters. A pricing change, a key hire, whether to raise funding or not. And realize there's almost no one you can actually talk it through with. Your team's too close to it. Your friends don't get it. And so much of the advice online is for people 10 steps behind you. That's exactly why we started Tiny Summit. It's a small group of founders all past $1 million in ARR together for 2.5 days, built around roundtables and the kind of conversations you can't have anywhere else. It's December 5th through the 7th at one of the top resorts in Cancun. At your stage, getting one of those big decisions right pays for the trip many times over. Most of the folks in the room are part of SaaS Institute, our year-round community for founders past $1 million. Tiny Summit is where that community comes together in person. And if you join SaaS Institute before the event, your ticket's on us. Get all the details and your ticket at tinyseed.com/tinysummit. Let's move on to my first topic, which is a very thoughtful tweet from Baer, who's the co-founder of Youform. And I had mentioned him a couple episodes ago about doing lifetime deals because we had a question about lifetime deals. And it's like one-time payments or lifetime deals, however we want to call them. And I am bearish on them in general. I wouldn't do them, but I called Davis and Youform out as a success story in a sense that had done it. So Davis responded to me and said, in regards to the one-time payments, I would say overall it was a success for us, but I think it only works in certain circumstances. And I like that he did this because this is something I called out in the episode that I'm almost viewing the criteria more like freemium because it kind of is freemium. You get one payment, you do get some money, but then they're freemium from then on. And I was guessing, conjecturing, educated guessing, as we call it in the business, that would be the case. And so returning back to Davis's tweet, some things that worked in our favor. I already had a decent following on X. I had a large email list from our other product called OneUp. I had a successful track record, and OneUp's revenue meant we basically had infinite runway. And keep that in mind. Infinite runway to keep Youform alive forever, which helped with trust. On the flip side, most lifetime deals I see are people's first product, so it takes a lot of trust from a customer in someone who has not proven that they will stick with it long term. I think it made us $30,000 in the first few months and helped us get a foothold in the early going, and to be honest, provided some validation. We also had and still have a free plan, and there isn't really any additional cost or support burden that a pro plan user causes that a free plan user wouldn't also cause. So I'm going to assume the pro plan is the lifetime deal. We had both a lifetime deal and a monthly plan running simultaneously for a while, but then eventually dropped the lifetime deal once we hit 5K of MRR. The upfront cash was nice, but recurring revenue is definitely the healthier business model. Would I do it again the same way? Yes. Is it easily replicable? No. In fact, we saw many Youform copycats come and try to do the same with lifetime deals, and basically all of them are now shut down. So I appreciate Davis taking the time to write in, to put it on X and allow me to add more context to the counterexample. That's the thing is I often get questions that it's like, is this possible? Yes. Is it probable? Or should you do it? Probably not, is often my answer with a lot of things, right? With freemium, with trying to build a standalone SaaS if you're not a developer, with, not wanting to validate because XYZ reason, not wanting to stair step because you want to jump to standalone SaaS even though, you haven't ever launched a product. There's different things, right? And usually it's, well, you can do what you want, But in your shoes, I wouldn't. In my shoes, maybe I would, because I have more of a track record. I have resources, I have experience, I have a network and an audience and all that stuff. So really appreciate Davis weighing in on this one. My next email, which he sent to questions@startupsfortherestofus.com, is from Hussein from Scrollbook. That's at scrollbook.io. And he writes, "Hey Rob, I'm a solo founder. I spent 2 years building Scrollbook. Oh, that's a lot. A visual learning platform for nonfiction. 252 titles as 5-minute visual scrolls, free forever. And chapter-by-chapter breakdowns with infographics and professional audio. Plus BookBuddy, an AI reading coach grounded in the licensed library. Launched it April 17th of this year, 2026. The reason I'm writing is instead of charging a subscription, we priced it at $199 lifetime, and the first 1,000 got in for just $99 lifetime. Wow. We priced it this way in a category, which is book summaries and consumer AI, that is almost entirely subscription. I'd love your read on whether lifetime pricing survives this cycle for bootstrap consumer AI apps, or whether it's a founder mistake I'll be undoing in 12 months. Happy to send comp lifetime access if you or anyone on your team wants to check it out." I'll be honest, I dragged this here because it said lifetime pricing, and I thought Hussein was weighing in on the discussion. This was actually sent before I answered the previous question, but I want to weigh in on it, if only briefly. Scrollbook looks interesting. I don't like consumer products, and consumer AI especially is a dicey proposition, so it's not something I personally would be doing. The lifetime price at this point, 1,000 people for $100, and then 200 lifetime. I think similar to what Davis said. Do you have what he has, which is a social following and a need to not have revenue now? If everyone else is subscription, why are they subscription? It's because subscription is the best business model in the world. And so why are you breaking that? You know, if you go back and listen to the episode, it was 4 or 5 episodes ago. It was someone wanting to do more validation before committing to recurring support, in a sense, and keeping the product updated. But it sounds like for you, potentially, this could be to get more cash up front. If that's the reason, I'm intrigued by this. I wouldn't do 1,000 at $99. I might do 100 or 50. I can imagine doing it because what are you going to charge for this monthly? $5, maybe $50 a year, $5, $6 a month. So if you can instead get that $100 or $200 lifetime upfront and you need the cash, I could be convinced and get those early users. I think the big thing for me is their virality. I still come back to me feeling like lifetime deals are like free plans. And free plans really only work well. They're only worth it usually if you have some type of virality, like built-in virality, not like, oh, there's a share button here. It's like for every person that signs up, 0.2, 0.4, 0.5, full 1.0 number of people also sign up, are also like pulled into it, like Slack, right? You sign up for Slack, you don't sit there on your own. You're always going to invite at least one person. And usually, the viral coefficient is what this is called. Usually, it's above 1. For every person who signs up, you're going to invite 3, 4, 5 people, 10 people, 100 people. I don't see that here, but I haven't dug into BookBuddy and Scrollbook. I also wonder, why did you build 2 different products? Yeah, I guess this all sounds like B2C. And the only reason I could possibly see doing a lifetime deal here is to get more cash up front. Otherwise, you're selling basically it's like a one-time sale. It's like you're selling a towel on Amazon, right? And you're shipping them a thing and that's it. That's fine, but you always need to be finding more and more and more customers in order to keep the business alive. I've done that. Like all of my stuff before SaaS up until 08, 09 were one-time products. And even .NET Invoice, which sold for $300 a pop, it was just a grind trying to find new people every month. And the only way we did it was through SEO. Ads worked for a while until they didn't. And I did some content marketing. I did partnerships I would do these partnerships and it's like, oh, we'd have this amazing month, $5,000 in sales. And this was like a nights and weekends thing for me back in 2005, 6, 7. Like that was a chunk of money for me. And then the revenue would go back to the 2,000, I think it was between $2,000 and $3,000 usually every month. And all of that, such a big chunk of that was SEO. It was Google organic. or over time. It was as we sold more and we had annual renewals. So we did charge $80 or $100 of annual renewals so people could get up-to-date features and all that. So all that said, if you don't have a flywheel of traffic and you're selling one time, I think this is not a good business. And if you're selling B2C and not B2B, I think this is probably not a good business. So I appreciate your question, and I'd certainly wish you the best of luck, but those are my thoughts for now. My next email is one that I'm going to keep anonymous. And this is one, if you want to receive a weekly email from me, a weekly essay, although last 2 weeks I haven't sent an essay because I've been finishing the book, but I am going to get back on that train. Go to robwalling.com/subscribe. And I have new and innovative thoughts that sometimes appear on the podcast, but most of the time don't. In-depth thoughts, essays, all that kind of stuff that I'm sending out. So someone responded to that, and it was in an email that I had sent about if you share your business idea, should you worry about someone stealing it? And I wrote this long-form essay about it and even address in the age of AI. But if someone can build it in a weekend, are you still confident that I shouldn't share my business idea? And I address that in the essay as well. And basically say, look, it's like marketing, distribution, all that is the hard part. And he wrote back and he said, I got to see all of this firsthand this week. A friend of mine is an executive at a large tech company, and his contacts there inspired several good ideas for internal products. He built a couple of them with Claude, but then nothing. And I asked him why he didn't work with the stakeholders to start iterating and improving the products. He said he couldn't convince any of them to take the app seriously. Now I see what you mean from secondhand experience. Building is not, and generally has never been, the hardest part. And I say that in terms of just marketing and finding people. But in this case, it's like intrapreneurship where you're doing it internally. He built the products and people still internally weren't willing to give him the time of day around it. So that's a lesson for us, whether we are trying to market or convince folks internally. Certainly AI makes building products easier, but there's still all the other stuff around building that so many people forget is hard. Another email response I received, I'm going to keep it anonymous, is someone writing in saying, everywhere we turn, discounts and startup programs will not support bootstrappers. We secured our first enterprise account, so an enterprise deal for $250,000, yet companies like Google, who have Google Cloud Provider, GCP, and many others will only help if you are VC-backed. It seems crazy that you have to give up your kidney just to get a little help. Have you run into a similar thing? My answer is yes. And especially, when I was bootstrapping, and I've seen other bootstrappers run into this. The challenges with these startup programs is they want companies that ultimately have a lot of money to spend. And it is giving away the razor to sell the blades type thing, or giving, the first piece of candy is free. And they want you to start using GCP, but they want to know that you have money to use it down the line. And they want some type of what's the easy filtering mechanism? Because if they just said anyone can do it and you can bootstrap, they're going to get hundreds or thousands of applicants and have to sort through them. And that's expensive and costly and time consuming. But if some venture capitalist has invested in them, then that's at least, it says something. It says you have some funding, and it says someone has looked through your business and made sure it's somewhat legitimate, right? So yeah, I have seen it, and it's unfortunate. It's interesting, you don't actually need to be VC-backed, because Tiny Seed, through our accelerator, has a ton of these startup discount programs. And we are technically a fund, but it's not like you have to raise millions of dollars. I mean, our checks are in the $120,000 to $300,000 range. And so you don't have to raise that much to get them. But yes, this is the case. I've never seen exceptions to this. If you are out there listening and you know of exceptions, or you have a list of all the ones that are maybe bootstrapper friendly, feel free to write into the show. You can hit questions@startupsfortherestofus.com, or you can head to the website, startupsfortherestofus.com, click Ask a Question in the top nav, and submit audio, video, or text. It's a bummer to be a bootstrapper when it's not fair. And as a bootstrapper, you probably need the GC more than the funded companies do. But alas, that is I'll say it's, a form of, I guess, it's unintentional discrimination, I think. I don't think they specifically want to discriminate against bootstrappers. I just think it makes their job a lot simpler in terms of filtering. My next question is from Johannes.
Hi Rob, Johannes here from Sweden. I have a question around signing custom agreements with customers. We have a product that we sell to large size and also enterprise customers. And from now and then, we get requests from the customer to sign custom agreements. It can be just a basic NDA. It can be a special license agreement, or it can be some kind of purchasing agreement. And my question is how careful we should be about signing those agreements and how much we should have those agreements gone through and reviewed by a lawyer. So my question is from an acquisition standpoint, when a acquisition is done, how much do the M&A firm or the buyer go through these agreements, and like how much should we care about them? Because my thought or my point of view here is that we should try to be careful about not having a lot of agreements signed and really review the different terms there, so we don't end up with a pile of agreements with hard terms like huge liability clause and similar things. Yep. So that's my question. What's happening during with those kind of agreements during a due diligence of a company in like 1 to 2 million ARR range when it's getting purchased, and what can we do now to really prepare for not having any trouble with that further on?
Johannes is a frequent attendee of MicroConf. We met several times in person, and I believe he's also written into the podcast in the past. He's a longtime listener, so thanks for writing in. This is a really good question, and I've never answered it on the show. So I really appreciated him writing in. And for the record, he is the founder of SQL Spreads, SQLspreads.com. Use SQL Spreads Excel add-in to update data in SQL Server. And yes, I do realize I just said SQL and then SQL, and then I went back and forth. So you can hit me up on X if you're annoyed by the fact that I flip-flopped there. So I think you answered your own question, Johannes. It's basically, yes, you should be aware of anything that you sign. These days, look, not legal advice, definitely not a lawyer, but these days, I do like that Claude and ChatGPT they're not the worst at giving some legal advice. Now, there's a ton of liability. Have you heard about there was a case where they were asking ChatGPT, I think, legal questions and saying like, well, if I did this, what would the outcome be? And then when it got subpoenaed, he said, well, I was treating it like my attorney. So there's client-attorney privilege, right? Confidentiality. And the judge said no. And so it was admitted as evidence, and it was evidence against him because he was saying things in that transcript, to ChatGPT that really were damning evidence. So you have to be careful with all this. This is where, once again, I say this is not legal advice. But yeah, I think taking a first pass with AI is a thing. I think, man, by the time you're doing 1 to 2 million ARR, I do think that you need that contracts attorney who is not outrageously expensive, that you can have review definitely the more onerous contracts. In a perfect world, if you're going to cover your ass, yes, a lawyer reviews everything that you sign. Is that realistic for a bootstrapper? I would say not. Did I have a lawyer review everything that I signed or had my employees sign? No, I did not. Did I go to rocketlawyer.com years ago and download templates for employment agreements and IP agreements and basically skim through them and use them as is? I did. Did those pass the muster when we got acquired? Yes, they did. So it's that thing of I would, from day one, have $10 million of insurance and be an LLC and cover my ass on everything and dot every I and cross every T in a perfect world. And as a bootstrapper, you have to make trade-offs. You really do. And so this comes down to risk tolerance. If you're signing an NDA, do you need an attorney to review that? In a perfect world, yeah. Have I had an attorney review every NDA I've ever signed? No, I have not. I have read through them. And these days, I would also use AI to kind of give me a sanity check. But to get to the meat of your question, which is about during an acquisition, yeah, if you're being purchased for millions or tens of millions of dollars, they're 100%, they're going to go through everything you've ever signed and they're going to look at it. The thing that they are looking out for is, like you said, it's these big liability clauses. Because if they buy you and then there's uncapped liability for some contract that you've signed, that's a real problem. As I'm thinking through this, I think this would be a good question for me to ping over to Einar and see if he's seen, because he's been involved in many, many deals and big deals as well, right? 7, 8 figures. And I'm curious if there's ever been a contract that has really caused issues. Because I remember mine were not the cleanest, but everyone signed something, and I had signed a deal with a couple big Fortune 500/1000 companies, and I did my best to review them. I was aware of uncapped liability and that kind of stuff. But Johannes, I do think that you're thinking about it the right way. And the fact that you are even cognizant of it, I think is a step in the right direction. I'd also be interested in either going to Google or Claude or GPT and saying, what are some clauses? What are the top 5 clauses I should be on the lookout for, that could kill an M&A deal later on, and getting that kind of list. Because the only one that I can think of would be a big, like a liability swing, or where you've, the other ones are where you've like licensed out your IP, or you've given away any type of IP rights. It's that kind of stuff that really gets at the value of what you are selling. Because what are you selling? Well, you're selling your code, your customer base, your marketing, your brand, it's those types of things. So anything that degrades those would be of concern. But I like the way you're thinking about it. And I think, as with everything, it's a balance, and you kind of have to balance the risk tolerance of it. And look, if you're doing 10, 20 million in revenue, you probably want to afford an attorney to review everything. And when you're scraping by and doing a couple $100,000 in ARR, and you're trying to get to that 7-figure point, that's where you may have to make a few compromises as you move forward. And for my last question of the day, this one comes from a conversation on X. Jason Cohen, he is a smart Baer on X, said, once you build your product, you'll need to find 50 people to try to sell it to, whether in sales, assisted, or self-serve. Why would you first build the product and then only later find out what to build? Because you're scared, not because it's wise. And he links to, we'll obviously link this up in the show notes, but he links to an essay called The Code is Your Enemy. And it's an essay I think he wrote a while back. But then Mike Taylor, Hammer_MT, chimed in, how do you know it's a problem worth solving, though? Way more problems exist than profitable, scalable solutions. For the vast majority of problems in the world, the right solution is a service business or a charity, which isn't the type of business most tech people want to build. I also wonder how many successful businesses actually start with this kind of scientific customer-first approach. Every single example I can think of built an idea first and then launched it, sometimes pivoted after launch. My theory is you can't get real feedback from people until you give them a real product. Genuinely curious, though, because lots of smart people I respect believe in the lean startup/customer development approach. And then Johannes Radig wrote in and said, can we have a podcast episode on this, Rob Walling? And then asked about Laura Roeder and how she validated Edgar/Paperbell. All right, so here's my take on it. I know a lot of folks who have done either pre-sales or customer development conversations around this, like before building something. And I think the interesting thing is that the draw is to not do that. And so there are obviously more examples of people who, quote unquote, just launched something. But I think even a lot of those people who just launched something, a lot of those folks are launching something that either they paid for at their day job, they used to pay for themselves, they are truly scratching an itch. Like Drip was built out of a problem that I was having on the prior SaaS app Hittail. And so I knew there was at least one customer for it. And that's not a great way to go. And that's why I then went and got 11 yeses. I was trying to get 10, and I got 11 yeses of people who would try it. There was at least some validation I was building something. Jason Cohen got 40 yeses, I think, before doing WP Engine. A lot of things happen that way. Like Ruben Gomez with Signwell. You would say, well, did he do a bunch of customer validation and conversations? And it's like, kind of. He actually went and put up, it was either a landing page or a website, started doing SEO, started getting some traffic, and had a bunch of conversations with folks that were customers of BidSketch, which is his other SaaS app, right? That's proposal software. And so he was having these invisible conversations, invisible to us on the internet. We could say, well, he just launched Signwell because he thought it would work and he didn't do any validation. He did a ton of fucking validation. He did SEO. He did SEO keyword research to figure out, what he could rank for and how much traffic he could potentially drive. He was having conversations with past employees of other electronic signature services. He was doing market research out the wazoo. And it wasn't just, I don't mean going to Google and going to Reddit. I mean, it was conversations, validation in the truest sense of the word. I've actually just gotten out of doing a bunch of kind of research and thinking on this topic and interviewing folks who did validation, like Jordan Gall with Rosie. So heyrosie.com is that domain name. And you could say, well, I didn't see Jordan go out and get a bunch of purchase commitments. But you know what Jordan did do? And the reason I know is I just interviewed him about this and then included it in SaaS Launchpad, the book that I mentioned earlier. And I tell the story of how even a third-time founder with an exit under his belt went and did validation. And it isn't the exact copy of what Jason Cohen says. Did he go to LinkedIn and ask people to talk to him for 45 minutes and ask if they would buy it and that kind of stuff? No, I don't believe he did. But he did take several different ideas and he did research for demand, competitive research. He had a bunch of conversations, and I know he did this because he talked to me, and then he talked to Ruben about it, and then he talked to some folks. He's a Tiny Seed mentor, and he was talking to some folks at Tiny Seed, and he had a bunch of conversations and gathered information and looked at the market. And I do believe he actually had some potential customer conversations. I honestly didn't get so deep into that, but he did a real solid assessment of the market, the space, and not just stuff you can find on the internet. This is the issue, is I see a lot of builders who they just want to indie hack, right? They just want to kind of make a thing. And you say, oh, well, go do research and validate it. And they want to spend 20 minutes going to Reddit and being like, oh, see, someone has a problem, I want to build it. Or I have the problem, therefore I'm going to build it because even if no one else uses it, at least I have it for myself. And that's a dumb way to go about it. It doesn't mean it's not going to work, but I've heard that a lot and seen people build a lot of things that basically have a customer count of 1, and it's you. For you to take a few hours, maybe build a landing page, maybe have some conversations, do the customer competitor research, all these things. Again, I'm knee deep in this, or I was last week, writing this out, making sure it was, I stand behind it for SaaS Launchpad, because SaaS Launchpad is about all the early days, right? It's about coming up with ideas. There's a chapter called How to Find Startup Ideas. And then it's about how to validate. And I talked through the 220-200 framework I've talked about on the podcast. And then I talk about how to build a launch list and how to launch, find early customers, try scrape and claw to product market fit, talk about the 5 stages of bootstrappers, bootstrap SaaS, product market fit, all that stuff. So all that said, yeah, most of the successful entrepreneurs I know, when they go back to do it again, they do some type of validation. That's actually the biggest signal. For me, it's not, oh, there's several people who just launched, or there's a lot of people who just launched. Like a lot of Tiny Seed companies, when we fund them, I will ask them how they validated. Many of them just built a bunch of things. Some people, it was their 6th or 7th thing they launched, but they killed a year or 2 doing that. What I've noticed is that I believe, mostly without exception, every second or third time entrepreneur that I've seen that's doing it does some validation, has some conversations, does that research, and digs in. And there's specific questions you can ask, like from the mom test, and how do you find cold and warm folks to talk to? And there's all these different types of approaches. This is where you build your network. Often not your audience, because audience is not the best way to do it. But any case, those are my thoughts. I didn't do a whole episode on it, Johannes, but I am a believer. When we did Drip, I did some validation. I had customer conversations. I got 11 verbal yeses. I definitely did market research about how much demand there was. If I were to start another SaaS app today, you bet your ass I'd be doing all of this stuff that Jason Cohen talks about, that I talk about, that Ruben did, that Jordan Gall did, that there's a lot of folks. And I think that's telling, right? There's no one right answer and there's no one right way to do these things. But I do think there's kind of directions. There's I think being directionally correct. There's no map, but there's a compass that can kind of tell you yeah, most of us have done this. Most of the successful people have gone in that direction. And I do want to weigh in. There was kind of an interesting later piece of that thread where Jason Cohen said, no one said you should find a problem before the idea. In fact, I've explicitly said the opposite. I said talk to customers before you build the idea. Tons of examples of that. Superhuman is a nice one. So he's not saying that you can just talk to customers to come up with ideas. It's more about vetting your idea. I often say validation, not coming up with a new idea. And Mike Taylor came back and said, yeah, I'm specifically talking about came up with the idea talking to potential customers before you have a product. And Jason says, yeah, I've almost never heard of talking to customers in order to find an idea. My advice has always been to have an idea, then make theories about what would have to be true for this to really work, then test that by talking to customers. And that's what I'm saying as well. That's why I talk about validation. And in the chapter, How to Find Startup Ideas, I give, it's either 7 or 8 different approaches or kind of thought processes for how to come up with ideas. It's like, look at a problem you're experiencing at a day job. Look at something that you pay for at your day job. Is there a problem that a spouse or a friend or a coworker is experiencing at their job? There's all these things where, because you're looking for a problem. That's what I ask people these days. Hey, I want to tell you my startup idea. I say, first, tell me what problem it solves and for whom. Right? And if you're not starting there, it's not B2B SaaS, because you need to be solving some type of problem that some business has and will hopefully pay for. And that's the hopefully pay for part. And hopefully you can reach them at a scale for a cost that is reasonable enough that you can charge enough that you can make it a viable business. Each of those things you validate as much as you can separately and together through conversations and research and talking to people, smart people in your network. And then with all of that, you don't get to 100% validation. You don't get to where it's like, oh, the 100% this will work. There's no way. Maybe you go from 0 to a hunch, which is 10%, to, doing validation and vetting, do you get to 30, 40, 50% certainty that it'll work? Yeah, it's probably somewhere in there. And that's probably about as good as you're going to get without building something, without kind of diving in deep to this. So thanks, Johannes, for referring this over to me on X Twitter. And obviously, if you're out there in the wild and you see a conversation and you feel like you'd like to hear my take or the take of me plus a guest in a future episode, I'm at Rob Walling on Twitter. And you can, or on X, sorry. And you can follow me there. And of course, mention me if you want to call something to my attention. Starting to run a little low on questions. You can head to startwiththerestofus.com, click Ask a Question in the top nav. Audio and video questions, of course, go to the top of the stack. Thank you so much for joining me this week and every week. It's great to be in your earbuds. And this is literally one of the highlights of my week, is when I get to sit down and record an episode of this show. And that's why I've been doing it every week for 16 years, since 2010. Thanks for listening this week and every week. This is Rob Walling signing off from episode 845.